NASCAR fans. Today, we've got some news that's got the whole racing community shook. The dirt tracks are quieter today because we just lost one of the greatest to ever grip the wheel, Scott Bloomquist. You know that name. The man, the myth, the legend. But did you ever think we'd be talking about him like this? How did a guy who seemed invincible meet such a tragic end? And what does his loss mean for the world of dirt racing? We're about to break it all down, so buckle up and let's pay tribute to the GOAT of dirt tracks. Grab your tissues, folks. This one's gonna be emotional. Scott Bloomquist. The name alone brings up images of dominance on the track, a larger-than-life personality, and a legacy that's etched deep into the dirt of every raceway he ever touched. Scott was one of those guys you just couldn't ignore. Whether you loved him or you were a little jealous of his success, one thing's for sure, he was a beast behind the wheel. Born in 1963, Scott wasn't just any dirt racer. This guy was a straight-up titan of the track. He was the king of the dirt late models, a guy who racked up more wins than most of us can count. And we're not just talking about any wins. Scott nailed it in the biggest races out there. 8 dirt late model dreams, 4 World 100 at Eldora Speedway, and let's not forget those 3 Lucas Oil late model dirt series championships. But what made Scott different? It wasn't just his skill, although, let's be real, the guy could drive like no one else. It was his attitude. Scott had this air about him, this swagger that made him stand out. He wasn't just racing for trophies, he was racing for something bigger, something personal. And that's why fans loved him. Even if you weren't into dirt racing, you knew who Scott Bloomquist was. He was a name that carried weight. Scott wasn't just a driver, he was an innovator. He built and designed his own race cars, always pushing the envelope, always looking for that extra edge. That's why so many in the racing community looked up to him. He was a pioneer, a guy who didn't just follow trends, he set them. You'd see other drivers trying to figure out what Scott was doing with his cars, trying to decode the secret sauce that made him so damn fast. And most of the time, they couldn't keep up. But as much as Scott was a legend on the track, he was also a human being with his own set of challenges. He battled through injuries, health issues, and despite all that, he kept showing up. Even after retiring from full-time racing in 2020, Scott was still around, still involved, still mentoring the next generation of racers. The man just couldn't stay away from the dirt. It was in his blood. Be in the fast lane by subscribing to our channel. Stay updated on all the latest NASCAR news and driver stories. Now, it's the kind of news that punches you right in the gut. August 16th, the world woke up to the devastating news that Scott Bloomquist had died in a plane crash near his home in Mooresburg, Tennessee. He was just 60 years old. It's hard to wrap your head around it. This guy who was larger than life, who seemed invincible, was suddenly gone. Scott owned a small private airstrip near his home, and he was flying his 1938 Piper Cub, a vintage plane that just oozed character, much like Scott himself. But something went horribly wrong. His plane crashed into a barn on his property, and when authorities arrived, they found that Scott was gone. He was the only one on board. Now here's something that makes this even tougher to swallow. Scott wasn't a licensed pilot, and the plane hadn't been licensed since 2012. It raises all sorts of questions, but honestly, what it really does is add another layer of tragedy to this story. It's just heartbreaking, plain and simple. As soon as the news broke, the racing community went into mourning. Social media lit up with tributes from fans, fellow drivers, and everyone who had ever been touched by Scott's incredible career. NASCAR drivers like Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart, Kyle Larson shared their condolences. NASCAR, Dirty Mo Media, NASCARman, Kenny Wallace, Colby Evans, Bob Pockras, and many more from the fraternity posted a heartfelt message for the dirt car racing legend. And then there's Kenny Wallace, who probably summed it up best.
This is so hard to believe. I always thought Scott Bloomquist was different, unique, and I was always attracted towards people like that. When people were different, I kind of smiled and I talked to them because they were different in a good way. He was the smartest dirt racer of all time. He built, designed his own race cars. He won more races than anybody. He won every crown jewel there ever was. There was simply no more left for him to do.
And you know what? He's right. Scott's life was the stuff of legend, a mix of triumph, struggle, and an unyielding passion for the sport he loved. It's clear that Scott's impact was massive. He wasn't just another driver, he was a force of nature, someone who changed the game, who left a mark that will be felt for generations. As we wrap up, let's not just remember Scott for how he died, but for how he lived. The guy was a legend, a mentor, an innovator, and most importantly, a racer who loved the sport with all his heart. Scott Bloomquist was a name that will echo through the halls of dirt tracks forever. So let's raise a glass, tip our hats, and send our thoughts to Scott's family and friends. We've lost a true icon, but his legacy, that's never going to fade. Rest in peace, Scott Bloomquist. You will always be the king of dirt. If you've got your own stories or memories of Scott, drop them in the comments below. Let's keep his memory alive. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe for more interesting stories and updates from everything NASCAR. Do share this video with your friends. Until next time, keep the conversation going on, lucky dog on track.